David Lynch's Eraserhead. I can't see a thing because of that light, sorry. So we decided we wanted to show Waters and we wanted to show, and people had requested Night of the Living Dead, and we thought, let's just throw everybody in at the deep end and go to the two most notorious, so that's what we've done. So I'm just going to introduce each film very briefly. Okay, Night of the Living Dead. It isn't just one of the most important films in horror cinema, it's one of the most important films in American cinema, and as such, there is literally so much academic discourse out there about that, from critics, fans. So what I've decided when I put this presentation together is I'm going to concentrate on how a film that was intended for grindhouses and drives-in, a gore movie, became the first exploitation film to become a piece of art. Okay, to put the movie in context, 1967, Summer of Love. The Haight-Ashbury Peace and Love generation was tuning in, turning on, dropping out, and yet the following year, we see the most violent year in America's history since the Civil War. Martin Luther King was gunned down, leaving the inner cities ablaze in April, and the 60s, of course, bringing us women's liberation, gay liberation, the sexual revolution. Robert Kennedy gunned down. Vietnam, daily shocking images shown on television. You have to remember the young people at the time were the baby boomers. That is, kids who were born during or just after the war. Of course, this led to mass protests at universities across America. And in its final year, and the final year of the decade, 1969, Woodstock, the pinnacle of its generation, was followed by Altamont. Timothy Leary was replaced by Charles Manson. Okay, we have to go back 8 years earlier. Alfred Hitchcock took horror with Psycho out of the quotidian, the everyday, and he moved it in. Took horror rather out of the Universal Studios terrain, the supernatural, and he moved it into the quotidian, the everyday. The guy next door, living next door to you, slightly odd, he could be Ed Gein. George R. Romero's film borrows a lot from Psycho, borrows several motives, notice the stuffed animals, and Hitchcock chose to shoot Psycho, with his TV crew. He borrows many motives, and he also sort of takes the characters under siege by a menace, dysfunctional, bickering characters, from Hitchcock's The Birds. It's thematically similar. Okay, when the film opened, it played various drive-ins throughout the country, and it didn't make much of an impact. Critics ignored it. The ones who did, like Variety, weren't very kind. Now, it ended up on an exploitation sort of double bills with, believe it or not, kids' movies. Now, Roger Ebert saw it at a Saturday morning, one of America's top critics saw it on a Saturday morning with a group of children, and famously he wrote a piece for Reader's Digest. The movie had suddenly stopped being entertainingly scary. A girl across from me was weeping. That actually kind of kicked it off. That got a lot more people going to it. The piece was entitled, Do You Know What Your Children Are Watching? Night of the Living Dead is the beginning of the modern horror movie. Yet it still opens. It opens in a familiar horror movie place. Okay. Yet, from the outset, Night of the Living Dead throws decades of convention out the window, and we all know, horror fans all know, the most iconic dialogue in They're Coming Together is very, very common amongst horror fans. Night of the Living Dead is genuinely scary. Audiences were not used to being disturbed by a horror movie. Days, weeks, hours, still being frightened. What Romer and his team, and only a few of the actors were professionally trained, but good luck spotting which ones, because for an exploitation film the acting is excellent, if heightened. We have to remember that television news at the time was filmed on black and white film. It obviously eventually was then turned to videotape. What Romero and his team do, for a low-budget movie, this would usually only highlight its shortcomings. What it does is it gives it a very, very much cinema verite feel. you actually feel like you are trapped in the farmhouse with the main characters, which is unlike Hitchcock. Hitchcock's films keep you at a distance, you're away, you're watching a movie. And of course, bear with me, hearing about Vietnam, etc., we feel like what we're watching is kind of horrifyingly real. Of course, it introduced a new villain to cinema, the zombie. Now, zombies were nothing new, but they always borrowed from Haitian folklore, the voodoo, supernatural. If you had asked me as a 5-year-old what's a zombie, I would have said it's a reanimated corpse who's come back with one purpose only, to feast on the flesh of the living. That's what everyone that is the accepted term. That is the accepted term. I mean, I think even Oxford's dictionary have put that in now. Okay, I'm a little ahead of myself. We must note that the word zombie is actually never heard in Night of the Living Dead. They are referred to as ghouls. Okay, this movie. Now, this movie is also very important because it's one of John Waters' favourite movies. It has the dubious distinction of being the first gore movie, yet it was banned in Britain up until about 8 years ago. I'd obviously read loads and loads and loads about it over the years. It sounds really good. Nothing can prepare you for how dismal Blood Feast is. But every 10 minutes, there is a real bloody scene of dismemberment. However, it's not frightening. However, in a later John Waters film, Serial Mom, a character refers to Blood Feast as the Citizen Kane of gore movies. Okay, when we get to some of the... excuse me. Dwayne Jones was cast as Ben. Now, he was given the part because he turned up and he was the best actor. Now, immediately, with obviously race riots and all that being such a fever pitch in the country, it was immediately read into that it was deliberately cast. He was not deliberately cast, he was cast because he was the first actor, best actor. None of the other actors in the script referred to him as black, and his relationship with Harry in the film was very much what we were seeing, kind of like, a lot of race relations have been read into it. And also, the kind of eventual distressing close of the movie evokes images that people were seeing in the Deep South at that time. A remarkable vision of the late 60s that offers the most literal possible image of America devouring itself. Horror was never the same again after Night of the Living Dead. First of all, George A. Romero, he continued with Martin, one of the best horror movies of the 70s. Dawn of the Dead, of course, equally political in 77. Day of the Dead in 85. And he came back to the zombie movie for 2005's crappy Land of the Dead. And I think he's done a couple more. Okay, here we go. Last, this was the beginning of the American nightmare. Horror traditionally introduces a threat to normality. We battle this threat and it's defeated. The American nightmare, the term was coined by Robin Wood. The threat might be defeated at the end of the film, but for how long? The threat might be defeated, but at what cost? Or the threat might even win out. Okay, a true classic, Night of the Living Dead, was the film that gave us the modern horror movie. I'm coming back at midnight for Pink Flamingos, completely uncut. I'll introduce that one then, I'll be less nervous then, but thanks for listening so much, and again, thank you so